It's less than 2 months since George Osborne told us the UK economy was growing fast. Today he delivered a much gloomier message. We're facing a dangerous cocktail of economic risks and must guard against creeping complacency. Events today seem to back up the Chancellor's worst fears. Global turmoil on the markets as oil prices continued their downwards fall. With Scotland's economy lagging behind the UK as a whole, Laura Maxwell's been looking at the prospects for the year ahead.
A flicker of hope in a gloomy economy. Made in Glasgow, sales of these candles continue to rise. This shop opened in October, with plans for further expansion this year.
Well, make no bones about it that we have been in a recession for, well, 8 years, shall we say, and there have been tough times and some companies have not survived. We've been lucky enough to survive. And the consumers have got money in their pocket and confidence is returning. It's been slow, but things are looking good.
Not everyone's as confident, especially the Chancellor, who's decidedly gloomy in fact.
Last year was the worst for global growth since the crash. And this year opens with a dangerous cocktail of new threats from around the world. For Britain, the only antidote to that is confronting complacency and delivering the plan that we've set out. Anyone who thinks it is mission accomplished with the British economy is making a grave mistake.
At just 0.1% growth in the last quarter, Scotland's economy is already underperforming the UK's, and it's also experiencing some difficulties.
The unseasonably warm and wet weather over the last couple of months has certainly dampened spirits here on the High Street. This morning, Marks & Spencer's announced that their pre-Christmas sales were down almost 6%. Next, too, have described their Christmas figures as disappointing. Now, that's not great news for those retailers, but more importantly, perhaps, is what those figures tell us about consumer confidence.
Business confidence, too, is shaky, especially with other uncertainties on the horizon.
Looking at 2016, obviously we've got Scottish Parliament elections. The results of that are, I suppose, uncertain. And obviously we're looking at a Parliament with significant tax-raising powers for the first time. And the use of those powers by the next Scottish Government could have a material effect on doing business in Scotland. So we'd want to make sure that that's continued to be applied in a way that will make Scottish businesses competitive.
It's not just the Scottish election which could impact on business. There's the small matter of a possible referendum on Europe and perhaps the first interest rate rise in almost a decade. So how do we overcome these uncertainties?
We have low productivity in the UK. We have probably slightly lower productivity in Scotland. The only way that we're going to get back to 2.5–3% growth on a continuing basis is by raising productivity. And I'd like a real sharp focus on that point for 3 or 4 months and coming up with policies which business approves of and government and Scottish enterprise and others can support.
The global economy is far from stable. How Scotland fares will depend on a raft of new fiscal powers and whether or not a future Scottish Government is prepared to use them.
Laura Maxwell reporting there. Well, joining me now to discuss all this is Scottish Labour's spokeswoman on the economy, Jackie Baillie, and from the SNP, Kenenth Gibson, who's convener of Holyrood's Finance Committee. Welcome to you both.
Good evening.
Kenenth Gibson, rather gloomy words from the Chancellor today, quite a different tone from the autumn statement. Do you think he's trying to prepare us for bad news to come?
Well, I certainly hope not, but it looks as if it could be. I mean, yesterday the Finance Committee, of which Jackie also sits on, took evidence from Robert Choate of the Office of Budget Responsibility, and one of the great concerns that came across to me was the fact that a 0.5% increase in the interest rate, which is possible this year, would cost the UK 20 billion a year. Now that's 20 billion that have to be raised either through taxes or spending cuts. So that's clearly get serious implications if that was actually to take place.
And on Scotland, what would the implication be? Because obviously the economy's a bit more sluggish here.
Yes, well, I mean, the Scottish economy's grown steadily over the last 3 years, but obviously it's slightly less in the UK because of the impact on oil prices at this time. And I noticed Jeremy Peat talking about productivity, but whereas UK productivity has actually stayed the same since 2007. Scotland's increased by 4%. So I don't think things are quite as gloomy, but clearly there'd be concerns for everyone, from people who've got mortgages to businesses to taxpayers, if in fact these gloomy predictions did actually come to pass.
Well, Jackie Baillie, is the Chancellor right to warn of creepy complacency, that, you know, we really need to keep a tight rein on spending?
I think he's right to warn of the consequences ahead. I have to say his autumn statement was only in November, and some of the things he's warning us about now, he knew then. But I am genuinely concerned for the impact on the Scottish economy. It is the case that our economy is operating at a slower level than the rest of the UK.
And why is that, do you think?
Well, yeah, I can tell you a number of factors that, and I think Jeremy Peat is right. You know, we need to do better at productivity. We need to do better at jobs. You know, compared to the rest of the UK, we have, in percentage terms, fewer people employed and more people unemployed, so we're not performing as well against a range of measures. And Kenny Gibson's quite right to say, you know, with oil at a staggering $32 a barrel, when it costs in excess of 50 to get it out the ground in the first place, our economy is really struggling, and I am concerned about what happens in the future. Now, we've already revised the figures downwards. The Scottish Government is indicating that growth has gone from, in 2015, 2.2% to 1.9%. They expect it to be 1.8% this year. I actually think when the GDP figures come out, we'll see it's lower still. And that really plays badly for our economy and for consumer confidence.
There's a whole host of new powers coming down the track for the Scottish Parliament. What's the SNP going to do? How's the SNP going to use these powers to stimulate the economy?
A lot of these powers, first of all, won't be available until April of next year, as you know, so it would be for a future Scottish Government after the election to decide on that. But at the moment, we're doing a lot. I mean, we've got 8 innovation centres that we're establishing. We've got we're spending more on R&D than all but 3 countries in the world per capita. We heard from the Chamber of Commerce about business, but we've got the most competitive rates profile in the whole of the UK, so it's a good place to do business. And we're the second best place in the UK in each of the last 9 years the SNP's been in power for attracting inward investment. So it's not all gloom and doom. We've increased exports by 40% in the last 8 years. And even if our growth shrinks to 1.8%, it is still growth. Remember, under the last Labour government, we had a 6% fall at the time, at the peak of the recession in output. So we're not in that gloom and doom situation just yet, but things could be a lot better. Yeah. We need to invest more in infrastructure, and that is what we are going to do also.
Jackie Baillie.
I think all the indicators are things are going to get worse. I don't want complacency from any government, because if we act now, we can maybe actually stabilise things. The disappointing thing is, you know, despite the 8 innovation centres, despite all the list of things that Kenny outlined, growth is declining. We are heading in the wrong direction on so many of these indicators.
So what would Scottish Labour do, though? Because there's been a lot of talk about you making the wealthiest pay more in tax, for example, but it can't all be about that to stimulate the economy.
Well, can I say that the one thing that the experts tell you is if you want to grow your economy, you need to invest in your people, and that's about education from the very early stages right the way through colleges and universities.
Which is going to take time.
Of course, but it's the skills of the nation that feed into how successful an economy you have. We would also be looking ahead to the industries of the future, making sure we identify what they are, because in 20 years' time, the type of jobs we work in now will be completely changed. You know, we need to be looking ahead, investing in our people to take care of those opportunities. But also we should, you know, as Kenny said, attract inward investment. The shame is the inward investment has actually led to fewer jobs. We want to see it work in a way that increases the number of jobs that are available in Scotland.
Well, inward investment brought 3,500 additional jobs to Scotland last year, so we are.
That's of less course, than before.
And the number of but it's 3,500 additional jobs, and the number of apprentices under the SNP's almost doubled from 15,000 to some 27,000. We're going to increase that further.
But
so we are investing in skills.
Wouldn't we expect the Scottish economy to be performing better if the Scottish Government had been stimulating the economy
But it's performing better than would otherwise be the case.
Well, not the rest of the UK.
No, but because oil and gas is a huge sector, it's been impacting. But if you look at the gap that exists between Scotland and England in terms of per capita income, in terms of productivity, in terms of jobs and output, in the 9 years since the SNP has been in power, all these gaps have shrunk. Our per capita income is higher than UK average. We've got the second highest number of women employed in the whole of the European Union. Our youth unemployment level is 9% higher than employment level, I should say, is high, 9% higher than it is in the UK as a whole. So we are performing better than the UK, and we've certainly closed the gap that Labour bequeathed us.
I'm really sorry. We're out of time. I'm going to have to just leave it there. I know we could talk about it a lot longer. Thank you both for coming in this evening.
Thank you.